Welcome back inside Gillette Stadium, everybody. My name is Mike Petraglia, joined as always by Patriots expert columnist for WEEI.com, Christopher Price. All right, Chris, we have reached the bye week of the postseason for the Patriots. It's a week of rest that they certainly deserve, earned, and need. Your gist of where the Patriots are at after a 12-4 record heading into this bye week?
Well, I think that, to your point, I think it's a very good one. This team really needs that week off. When you look at some of the fundamental elements they have on both sides of the ball, the fact they need to get Edelman as close to 100% as possible. You need to get guys like Hightower and Chandler Jones and everyone else in that nucleus, that short list of like 10 to 12 guys. They're going to take that extra week. They're going to do their best to heal up to get, again, as close to 100% as possible. This is a team that really needs bye week. We've hit on it on a number of occasions over the course of the second half of the 2015 season. Now here we are. They're going to take the week. They're going to do some self-scouting. They're going to look at getting healthy as possible, and then they're going to look forward.
All right, before we talk any more about the team on the field, there's some off-the-field issues that always come up for a successful team that is in a bye week, namely the coaching carousel around the NFL. And just like every year in the last 5 or 6 or so here in New England, Josh McDaniels and Matt Patricia, those names come up. But I think the first one, or the really big news this year, is Matt Patricia has really jumped into that next level of, I think, serious consideration. We're hearing Miami, we're hearing Cleveland. Adam Schefter tweeting out those reports on Tuesday. Josh McDaniels, of course, drawing some interest in Miami. I guess the question I have for you, Chris, is how serious do you think those teams are in both of them, or specifically Matt Patricia?
I think teams are serious enough to come calling, and I think that right now I think that both of them are happy where they are. I think if, my gut feeling tells me that they're going to end up staying. I do think that the Patricia interview is almost more informational than anything else, because you talk to people around the league and nobody knows much at all about him. But I've long been an advocate for him to at least be a part of the conversation. I think he deserves that level of recognition. I think he goes out, he takes one interview, maybe he takes a second interview, but ultimately he ends up back here in New England. I think that it's good for where he is at this stage of his overall professional development to be able to draw that kind of interest, but I don't know if he's ready to take on the full-time head coaching duties quite yet. A lot of it also just comes down to the right situation, the right quarterback, the right owner, what sort of GM is in place. So there are a lot of different variables when you're talking about these kinds of things, but I do think it's good for Patricia to, again, at least be a part of that conversation.
2 years ago, Josh McDaniels was in a similar situation. His hometown Cleveland Browns came calling, and a lot of people assumed that would be the right situation, the right time for McDaniels to leave here and really start in his hometown. And McDaniels told us, the reporting crew following the team, shortly thereafter that, no, my family really loves it here in New England, and we believe him. Yeah. And, that's why, when these coaching interview possibilities come up, we shouldn't assume that a coach like McDaniels or Patricia in a very good situation in New England is just going to jump ship.
Yeah, I think that they're two really intriguing jobs for my money, if you're McDaniels and Patricia, that would interest you more than some of the other jobs. I think the first one would be the New York Giants, because that's a flagship franchise. It means something to be the head coach of the Giants. I think that the Giants are committed to a stable infrastructure in that locker room, in that franchise. So I think that there are a lot of positives there. You look at Eli Manning, no matter what you think of him, he's a franchise quarterback who's won 2 Super Bowls. You do have some stability at that position as well. You have a great young wide receiver in Odell Beckham Jr., and you have some pieces that you can start to build around on the defensive side of the ball. The other job that I think...
Let me guess. The Miami Dolphins.
No, the other job I think that would be really intriguing, if Chip Kelly doesn't take it, would be Tennessee. Tennessee does have some flexibility financially. They have a young franchise quarterback, and they're clearly willing to build. They're clearly willing to give whoever takes that job a little bit of leeway. So I think that would be a really interesting job as well. So those are the two jobs that I think, if I'm McDaniels and Patricia, I at least listen. Again, I don't think that either of them are going to go out and take either one of those jobs, but those would be the two most intriguing offers.
Let me not turn this into a coaching carousel video, although probably well on the way to doing that. But the reason I said Miami, Chris, is we saw on Sunday they have a lot of pieces in place, certainly on the defensive side of the ball, and they have a quarterback, hate him or love him, in Ryan Tannehill, who's signed long-term and appears to be that franchise quarterback, or they intend to have him as the franchise quarterback. So I guess my point with Miami is the stability in terms of a lot of key pieces on the roster.
You do have a lot of key pieces on the roster. At the same time, you don't have a whole lot of stability when it comes to the ownership group. Right. Stephen Ross, over the last 5 years, has demonstrated that he kind of blow a little hot and cold when you're talking about who he wants as a head coach, who he wants in there as a GM. They've gone up and down. And so, look, I'm not trying to tell you that the New York Giants are the very model of stability when you're talking about ownership, GM, coach, player. But I think it does offer a little bit more stability than Miami. The other thing about Miami, there's not a lot of financial flexibility when you look at the cap situation. You're stuck with those guys, good or bad. Now,
thanks to Ndamukong and Sue, for one.
Exactly. Now, you can look at Sue and you can look at Tannehill as fundamental building blocks, but at the same time, if they're not on the same page as the head coach, that whole thing is not going to get very, very far. So I do think that there's a lot of good stuff to like about Miami, but I think the bad outweighs the good when you're looking at those coaching jobs as they stand right now.
Cleveland Browns, speaking of teams looking for a head coach, just made a kind of an outside the box in terms of NFL context move in hiring Paul DePodesta, the Moneyball guru who helped with the Oakland A's and Billy Beane. Everybody knows that story in baseball. Hired him to be a statistical analytic chief of personnel type of advisor in their front office. And my question for you, as Bill Belichick spoke here on Wednesday, he said, yeah, statistical analytics, not really my thing. Now, he didn't say he doesn't use them, but I think his point was they're a part of our evaluation process, perhaps long term. But in terms of getting ready for a game, I don't think he's going to a stat book to determine what his best strategy is, 4-3, 3-4 scheme in the last 5 minutes of the quarter.
I think part of it is that you have to remember that the best franchises, including this one, use a mix. They'll look at some analytics, they'll look at some numbers, they'll look at some film. I think the biggest takeaway from that statement is the fact that, look, if you're a head coach and you can't determine 90-10 on your own in that moment like that, you probably should, and I'm paraphrasing here, but you probably shouldn't be a head coach in this league, or you're going to be a head coach. You're not going to be a head coach for long in the National Football League. There are certain statistical tendencies that you are just aware of instantly as a head coach. And so I think that maybe he was fibbing a little bit when he talked about really not relying on analytics a whole lot. But I think at the same time, I think you look at analytics, you look at film, you look at tendencies, you look at context, you look at situation, you take it all into consideration when you're making a decision as a head coach.
And certainly he did, as you mentioned, say, if you can't tell an 80-20 tendency, then what are you doing?
Yeah.
And I think that's Bill Belichick's point in terms of how he views analytics versus actually watching game film and scouting. Okay. Tom Brady walked to the podium here on Wednesday, and we can all rest a little bit easier. He didn't trip on the podium. He didn't limp to the podium, favoring his right ankle. Your takeaway from where Tom Brady said he was, I think the biggest thing he said is, mentally, I'm in a good place right now to start getting ready for the postseason.
Yeah, this is a guy who's done it how many times? What, a dozen times now over the last 13, 14 years? I don't think that it would be a surprise to see him come out, divisional playoffs, here in Foxborough and put together some pretty good numbers. Again, he falls under that category of, because of what happened in the regular season finale, I think in a lot of ways he falls into that category of a guy who could use an extra week to get ready physically, to make sure that, again, he is as close to 100% as possible. The ankle injury, it looked a little dicey during the game. You guys were there. You guys had a better view of it, but at the same time, I think given what we've seen from him in his ability to bounce back from situations like that over the years, I'm not going to say it's a long-term thing.
My concern for Tom Brady is the offensive line. And I know this is a horse we're beating it like a dead horse, but when you watch what happened on Sunday in Miami, and if, for that matter, the week before against the Jets, I don't care if Julian Edelman gets back to 100%. If Tom Brady is under duress for most of the game, it's going to be hard for him to get the ball to Gronk or Julian Edelman or Danny Amendola.
Yeah, I agree with you. And look, this offensive line is not where it needs to be right now. And at the same time, we've seen this on numerous occasions over the last year plus, where Brady can be his own best offensive lineman. And if he is throwing to a more trusted target like a Julian Edelman, we've seen it with Gronk a little bit, with Amendola, if he has his full complement of options, save the guys that are on injured reserve the rest of the season, I think that snap to throw quickness that we saw earlier in the season where it's under 2 seconds, where he gets the ball and gets it out as fast as possible, can minimize a poor offensive line. It can't wipe it out completely. Look, again, like I said, the offensive line is not where it needs to be right now going into the postseason. At the same time, there are ways around it. Brady, working with Edelman, working with Amendola, working with James White and Gronkowski, I think they're in a better place now than, say, they were 2, 3, 4 weeks ago because those guys are coming back.
All right, let's focus on the games coming up this weekend. The AFC, they're doing something different this year, Chris. They are playing the AFC wildcard games on one day, the NFC wildcard games on the next. That would be Sunday. But let's take a look at the Saturday games. First of all, the Chiefs and the Texans in Houston. It's a rematch of a Week 1 game. The Kansas City really established their dominance. Then they lost 5 straight, and they came back and won their last 10. But the Chiefs and the Texans, Billy O'Brien gets his team to the AFC Southern Division title. I think that's very commendable considering what he was up against early in the year. How do you see that game breaking down?
I agree with you. I think it's very commendable, but I think this is the end of the line for the Texans. I think when you look at what Kansas City brings to the table, over the last 10 games, doing it 5 games without Justin Houston and a large part of the year without Jamal Charles, I think it's been very, very impressive. I quite frankly think that the NFL should reseed once the playoffs roll around and you have a situation and you have an 11-5 team in Kansas City going into Houston to face, what, a 9-7 Houston team, yep, which I think is a little bit unfair. I think when you look at Kansas City, I think if Houston is available to play, if Houston's ready to go, if he's healthy enough, if Chakandrick West can give you what he was able to give you really over the second half of the year. Travis Kelce, they have a lot of options there in the passing game. Alex Smith is not going to overwhelm anyone, but at the same time, he doesn't take a lot of chances. He's smart with a football. I think Kansas City ends up winning that thing.
All right, and we have to come to the game that everybody's going to be watching in these parts, including yourself and yours truly, I should say. Obviously, full disclosure, I am from the hometown of Pete Rose and Boomer Esiason and Jerry Springer. Will Marvin Lewis finally win a playoff game? That's what everybody wants to know. I have said all season long about the Cincinnati Bengals. That story does not start to begin to be written until the playoffs begin. Well, Saturday night, they face their nemesis. I put the comparison like this. The Red Sox had the Yankees in the early 2000s and needed to get past them. I think the Bengals need to get past the Pittsburgh Steelers at home, a place they've always struggled for some reason against the Steelers. How do you see the Bengals-Steelers playing out Saturday night at Paul Brown Stadium?
I think Cincinnati ends up winning that thing. I just have too many questions about the Steelers on the defensive side of the ball. I think Pittsburgh can run up and down the field with anybody. I think they can score points with anybody. When you're talking about that offense, you're talking about that passing game. But I just think that if you're getting into a shootout with Pittsburgh and you have enough on the defensive side of the ball, and I'm specifically talking about Cincinnati here. I think Cincinnati has enough on defense. I think that they have enough on defense to come out of this thing with a win. But you're looking at a 38-35 outcome here because, again, Pittsburgh can put up a lot of points. You flip it over, I think Cincinnati's going to be able to run with them. I think Cincinnati's going to be able to just squeak that one out.
It'll be fascinating to see if A.J. McCarron indeed starts one more game, and if the Bengals win that game, they will play the Patriots here at Gillette Stadium on Saturday afternoon, 4:35 game on January 16th. Would it be A.J. McCarron or would it be Andy Dalton? If that plays out, what's your first guess?
I have to imagine that a lot of it depends on the performance of McCarron in the divisional playoff run. If he comes out and lights it up and goes 35 for 49 for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns, you got to keep him in the starting job. You have to ride the hot hand. I think that if McCarron struggles and they still find a way to win, yep, I think then you have a real question, because I think that, even given his playoff performance over the last 3-4 years, you look at Andy Dalton and maybe he's won the job, maybe he's won the right to come back. I don't know. It's going to be a real question. It's going to be a good question if McCarron comes out and dominates, and then you could still go to Dalton. So there are a lot of questions with that Cincinnati roster on the offensive side of the ball going into the postseason. Amazing
that Dalton was truly a leading MVP candidate probably 10 weeks into the season, and now we're wondering if he'll even get his job back. That is if Marvin Lewis breaks his 6-game losing streak in the playoffs. We'll find out. It'll be fun watching the games this weekend, Chris. Patriots get a weekend to rest and get mentally and physically ready for their playoff game here inside Gillette on Saturday afternoon, 4:35, January 16th. We'll have all the coverage between now and then on WEEI.com. Inside Gillette Stadium for Ryan Hannibal, he is Christopher Price. I'm Mike Petraglia, WEEI.com.